On the 11th of December 1941, Adolf Hitler stood before the German Reichstag and declared war on the United States of America. Nobody asked him to. Nobody pressured him into it. Japan, his ally, hadn't requested it. And America, still reeling from Pearl Harbor 3 days earlier, hadn't declared war on Germany. Hitler did it entirely voluntarily. And in doing so, he handed the Allied powers exactly what they needed to defeat him. So why did he do it? To understand just how catastrophically stupid this decision was, you first need to understand how carefully America had been kept out of the war up to that point. Since 1939, Franklin Roosevelt had wanted to help Britain. He was under no illusions about what a German-dominated Europe would mean for the United States, but America's public was firmly against involvement. The memory of the First World War was still raw, the losses still felt, and there was a powerful and loud isolationist movement that had spent years ensuring America stayed out of European affairs. Roosevelt had even promised voters during the 1940 election that he would not send American boys into any foreign wars. He meant it as a political promise. The isolationists meant it as a condition. And so Roosevelt had to get creative. He pushed through the Lend-Lease Act in 1941, which allowed America to supply Britain and later the Soviet Union with weapons, food, and equipment without technically entering the war. American ships were escorting convoys partway across the Atlantic. American naval vessels were exchanging fire with German submarines. By the summer of 1941, America and Germany were effectively fighting an undeclared naval war in the Atlantic. And yet Hitler refused to take the bait. This was entirely deliberate. Hitler's military and naval commanders, particularly Admiral Raeder, had been pushing for permission to attack American ships freely. Hitler said no. His reasoning was straightforward. Germany was already fighting Britain and the Soviet Union. Opening a formal conflict with the United States before the Eastern Front was resolved would be reckless. The Americans had a massive industrial capacity, an enormous potential army, and an ocean's worth of distance from the actual fighting. Provoking them into full commitment was the last thing Germany needed. And then Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. Within hours of the attack, Roosevelt went before Congress and delivered his famous infamy speech. Congress declared war on Japan almost unanimously. The one dissenting vote came from a pacifist congresswoman who had also voted against entering the First World War, which is at least consistent. But crucially, America had declared war on Japan, not Germany, not Italy, just Japan. Hitler was under no obligation to do anything. The tripartite pact that bound Germany, Italy, and Japan together was a defensive alliance. It only required Germany to come to Japan's aid if Japan was attacked. Japan had done the attacking. Legally and technically, Hitler owed Japan absolutely nothing. And yet 3 days later, there he was, declaring war on America anyway. So what was he thinking? The first reason was that Hitler had simply convinced himself that war with America was inevitable. Roosevelt's Lend-Lease program, the Atlantic convoy escorts, the undeclared naval skirmishes. In Hitler's mind, America was already in the war in everything but name. A formal declaration, he believed, changed very little in practical terms. What it did do was allow German submarines to finally operate freely in American waters without restriction, which Admiral Raeder had been desperately pushing for. Hitler saw this as a genuine military advantage worth having. The second reason was alliance credibility. Japan was Germany's most significant partner. If Germany failed to stand alongside Japan at its moment of crisis, the alliance would collapse in all but name. Hitler was also privately convinced that Japan would now tie America up entirely in the Pacific, leaving Germany free to finish its business in the East. A two-front war for America, he reasoned, was a weakened America. The third reason, and arguably the most revealing one, was ego. Hitler had spent years being diplomatically outmaneuvered by Roosevelt. The Lend-Lease Act, the Atlantic Charter, the quiet American support for Britain. Roosevelt had been waging a proxy war against Germany while keeping America officially neutral, and Hitler knew it and resented it deeply. Declaring war was, in part, Hitler seizing back the initiative. He would not wait to be drawn in. He would choose the moment himself. What he catastrophically miscalculated was the effect this declaration would have on American public opinion. Before Pearl Harbor, the isolationist movement had real political power. Roosevelt could not have brought America into a European war against the public's will. But Hitler's declaration removed that obstacle entirely. Overnight, the debate was over. America was in. And not reluctantly, partially, or with conditions. Fully, furiously, and with its entire industrial output pointed at Berlin. Within months, American factories that had been producing cars were producing tanks. Shipyards that had been quiet were working around the clock. The draft was expanded, and the full weight of the largest industrial economy on Earth began bearing down on a Germany that was already hemorrhaging men on the Eastern Front. Roosevelt, who had spent 2 years carefully navigating around isolationist opposition to get America involved in Europe, had the decision made for him by the man he was trying to defeat. Hitler had spent 2 years successfully avoiding a war with America. And then, when the one event occurred that gave him a legitimate reason to stay out of it, he volunteered to join it instead. It remains one of the most self-defeating decisions in modern military history. And it was made entirely by choice.